Welcome back to DTNsights. I am the host, Renny Vandewege, General Manager of Weather and Climate Intelligence for DTN. We have a really fun episode on tap for today. We brought in an expert on extreme weather risk for renewable energy. So I'm really pleased to introduce you to Mike Perron, the Vice President and Renewable Energy Market Lead for FM Renewable Energy. Mike, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks, Renny, for having me. Proud to be here.
Awesome. So would love to just kick off learning a little bit about FM, what your mission is, where your work is, and then a little bit about your role with the organization.
Okay, sure. So FM is a large commercial property insurer that's been around for 200 years. And we're one of the largest insurers for commercial property, and we only do property, whereas many insurers do other lines of insurance. So the property is mainly fire risk, but over the past 30 years, it's developed the extreme weather events has always been covered, but that's a significantly more um, portion of the risks that we're working with clients on helping avoid or mitigate against. So things like hail, severe convective storm, hurricane, earthquake, natural hazards, etc., hurricanes.
Awesome. So, and I know that is expanded for in your world a lot into the renewable space. How did you kind of end up in renewable energy as sort of a passion area and a work area for you?
Yeah, there's a story behind that most people who know me don't know. But I was actually at an Aegis conference. Aegis is another large mutual insurer like FM, and the speaker asked um, what we wanted to do with the rest of our career. And we were supposed to talk to somebody next to them about it. And I said, I'm going to work on working to help others understand renewable energy. And this is probably 7, 8 years ago. And at the time, I didn't know it as well as I do now either. But part of the reason for that is it became evident, and part of the reason I got involved and why FM, I'll explain how I got involved and how FM got involved. So I was a risk control engineer out of college. I'm a chemical engineer. I did that for 15 years or so and did some work in consulting and helping clients with process safety management programs before deciding, after starting a family, to get back into the insurance community. I thought that was a better work-life balance than what I was doing. I went to work for, I started my broking career at Aon, and I worked as a broker for 20 years before joining FM at Aon Marsh, Brown and Brown, and Willis before coming to FM. And I came to help FM with starting up a renewables group. And what was happening with FM is FM has a large position with thermal generation clients, and many of those clients are getting into the renewable energy arena. So those clients are looking for the help that FM provides to them on the thermal side to also help on the renewable side. And then there's other opportunities outside of our existing clients as well. It's a extreme weather events are a significant exposure to solar in particular. And it's an area where I think and FM believes that we can help the industry move forward.
Yeah, and it's been interesting to watch the kind of the advancement or increase in extreme weather also come along at the same time as this explosion of renewable energy, and they don't necessarily marry well together because there's, as you mentioned, a whole lot of exposure. What are some of those learnings in this first decade of really diving in and sort of entering in this space that you've seen, maybe the surprises and learnings maybe that you didn't expect in terms of that risk profile?
I mean, there's been a lot of different things, but some of the learnings in hindsight should have been obvious. I mean, the solar growth initially, if you go back 20 years, was on the coast. It was in California, it was in the East Coast, which didn't have exposure to hail. And hail is solar's the fastest growing. Well, that batteries are growing faster now, but solar is a significantly larger market share and growing the figures they're growing from are larger, so that they have a larger share. solar has, over the more recent last 10 years, is growing significantly in middle America, especially Texas. It's easier to get projects built in Texas. And who knew that, solar farms could be damaged by falling rocks, right? And so it's part of this is the weather changing, and that absolutely is part of the issue. But a lot of it has to do with projects are being built in areas where we didn't have a lot of data, where we didn't have a lot of understanding. And so the hail aspect of it is hail on solar, and the challenge associated with that is the biggest exposure. As far as surprises, there's supply chain aspects that surprised us. Transformers are more challenging. Getting solar panels, the whole issue with tariffs, all of these things are, and we'll get into this later, but hail stow protocols, that's a real surprise on some of the challenges clients face.
Sure. Let's jump into hail. I know that is one of the biggest risks that exists to these solar farms. You mentioned Texas being such an explosion. As a meteorologist and a storm chaser, I've seen some ridiculously large size hail fall in Texas. For those that aren't very educated in sort of that risk, can you sort of explain what's being exposed when you have a large hailstorm that comes over a solar plant?
Okay, so solar, let's just go basic into the technology, right? So a solar farm is composed of solar modules, and there's other things too, but most of the what's generating the power is these solar modules, and solar modules have cells that are almost like wafer fab developing, but you don't have that exposed to the atmosphere. You protect the cells with pieces of glass on the front and often on the back as well. So the glass is relatively thin. It used to be 4 millimeters, and it went to 3.2 millimeter, and now some of them as small as 2 millimeters thick. And when you have a solar panel, I'm just using my phone, what the solar panels do when they're on the utility scale, larger systems, is they're designed to follow the sun, so you maximize how much revenue you can get. And the tracking systems vary on how much that they can tilt, but it's often from 0 degrees to 52 degrees, maybe 60 degrees, and now as high as 75, even 77 degrees. But that when you have hail and when the solar projects are flat, they're taking the entire brunt of a hail impact. So what somebody decided after the Midway event, as a bit large insured loss in 2019, is that they could use this sun following tracker system as a defensive hail stow mechanism to limit the damage by deflecting the hail. So what clients try to do is, in advance of a hailstorm, using DTN and others to figure out when those events might happen, defensively stow at the highest angle possible, ideally against the wind, so that if the wind is going this way, it's going to really deflect well the damage, even for large size hail. There's a lot of challenges to doing that, making sure that you know that there's a hail loss coming, or there possibly could be, and then also figuring out what the direction of the wind is.
Absolutely, yeah. When seldom does a hailstone fall straight down. They're typically arriving with a severe thunderstorm. They may have winds 60, 70, even 80 miles an hour, and so there's curvature to it. How in those cases where that stowing has occurred and there's kind of this proactive motion, have you seen a lot of examples of success from that, where maybe previously a few years ago there would have been a large insured event, but you actually prevented it by implementing that risk mitigation?
And it's a really interesting question, Renny. We have seen some successes, and it's encouraging when we do that. We know when you test in the lab, we can see that it works, but it's different when you get out into the field, right? But sometimes there's successes and we don't even know about it. Like VDE is doing some work with us and with CAC and SIA on establishing a database of all the locations, utility scale projects that have had hail, but we don't think has had losses, and we want to find out and learn from those successes what went right, because we always hear what went wrong. We do have clients. I talked with one particular client last week where they've stowed in advance of hailstorms and they've shown it did work. I think that they've had several events since they had one where they did have a loss where things didn't work perfectly, but since then they've had at least 3 other occasions where some hail has hit and they haven't had significant damage.
Yeah, that's really, really encouraging trend. And this is a relatively new technology, so we can anticipate it just getting better and better over time. Um, I'm curious too, from the perspective of where you see that technology advancing going forward. So we've kind of gotten in the position where we see this as a potential. Do you think there are other technologies coming down the line that can help prevent these really, really big, massive insured losses, and in some cases uninsured losses as well, from these major incidents?
Okay, let me talk a little bit about that on the insurance part of it. So what insurers have done to protect themselves has been to reduce the amount of coverage they're providing for hail. They will sublimit the coverage and they'll take smaller lines. So if you go back 10 years, it used to be that G-Cube or Per Se or Axis, they would look to take 100% of a client's risk. Now, because of this hail exposure, no insurer wants to take 100% of a hail risk. Some of these programs, a recent battery fire project, I was told, had almost 60 insurers that were sharing that risk. And I know that's not extreme weather, but the same facet, the insurers didn't want to all be on the project for that big loss. So there was a large event, March 2024, southwest of Houston, where I forget if it was 10 insurers, around 10 insurers, but the largest had a 7.5% line size and a $50 million sublimit. So I'm sorry, a 15% line size and a 50 million sublimit. So they took a $7.5 million hit. And so that's helps the insurance community get comfortable, but it's not helping the industry move forward, because what we want to do is build stuff more resiliently, right? So to do that, what you asked about how the technology is changing, it was that the two largest tracker manufacturers, their protocol for hail stow was at 52 degrees for one and 60 degrees for another. Now they both are doing 75 degrees or better. And that was because we were able to show through past events that even stowing 5 or 10 degrees less can make differences in loss of to the panels of 30%. But getting the stowing to work is really important. And I know that this is around the technology, but it's an improvement we need to make when we're to have all parties involved in, including DTN or whoever the weather provider is, to make sure that the stowing, the process of getting these projects stowed. I think that I use the analogy of automatic sprinkler systems. You can't occupy a building until the sprinkler system has been tested, shown to be functional, and it works. And the stowing system was not designed. It was not designed to be for stow. It's designed to follow the sun. And so many times we're seeing systems that are installed and the stowing system hasn't been finalized, hasn't been tested, and more that even good clients that are trying to stow their systems in advance of a storm are finding when they test them that it's not working every time. It may be working 60, 70% of the time. We need to get it every time.
Yeah, and has it been a challenge too in that tech, given how remote many of these locations are, to get, whether it be bandwidth or, there's got to be some kind of, when you're talking about real-time weather information, like the speed at which that information is delivered matters. Have you seen any sort of challenges in terms of just the actual logistics of getting the data to these sites?
I did hear of one situation where the client decided they wanted to stow and press stow, and then the system initiated the stowing command correctly, and about a fifth of the project stowed. And these projects have gotten huge over time. Thousands of acres. So this project started stowing, but the computer systems timed out by the time that it's after it stowed phase one of the project. So they needed to manually tell it to stow again to get the rest of the project stowed. So that's not really logistic from distance, but it was a software limitation that we weren't aware of.
Sure. How have you seen the tolerance in terms of, we talk in the weather world about false alarm rates. What have you seen in terms of tolerance of like, hey, we're going to stow, even if the hailstorm misses us by 5 or 10 miles, where have you seen that kind of play out in terms of tolerance for risk in that regard?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've got to give kudos to Nicole Thompson at KWH Analytics, who studied this problem. She wrote a paper about um, how much would you lose if you stowed every time that there was a potential hailstorm? And the numbers were really tiny. I think it was 0.5% of revenue. And when you go into how much you have exposed on your assets and how much that's worth to you, um, that's really small relative to that really small cost, given the cost it would be to repair assets. The 2024 hail event I mentioned, that project was under construction and planned to operate for 30 years, and now a good portion of the project needs to be rebuilt as it was just starting to operate. I did talk to somebody yesterday, interestingly enough, where there are areas of the world where it, the reason the results were so low is when you have hail, it's usually cloudy. There's not a lot of sun, you're not going to get a lot of revenue. But there are exceptions to that. I was talking to somebody in Alberta, Canada, and they have a project that's on one side of the Rockies, and it could be the storm is on the other side of the Rockies. So it could be bright sun, and they're being told to stow, and that is a significant revenue loss to them. But that's an exception to the rule. In most cases, it's not a significant reason why you don't want to stow your project.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we focused a lot on hail, but hail is not the only weather risk that's out there. We've got DTN just released its hurricane outlook for the season. It looks like another pretty active season, above average in terms of hurricanes. What are some of the other major weather perils that you see as a risk to the renewable industry, whether that be solar or wind or in any other factor?
Okay, sure. And with solar, and I know we're getting away from hail, but when you have hail, you have wind, so you have to be able to protect for both too. And that's something that the industry is working on significantly as well. Some of these projects were not designed to handle; they were designed to handle wind rather hail. And when you're stowing for hail, you might be doing it at a lower angle, which is going to be more damaging than at the high deflected angle. But as far as solar, other exposures, you have potential for flood. You have wildfire is a big concern. Because these are often in places where they're subject to wildfire, and dry areas really need vegetation management to minimize that exposure. Combiner boxes can have ignition sources that can light the fire. Then you have lightning is another exposure to solar, but a real exposure to wind projects. So wind projects are made of steel, and they're the tallest thing in the area. They get hit thousands of times, and there are systems in those wind turbines to ground and handle those lightning strikes, but they need to be tested, and they need to make sure that they're always working. Um, and if they get hit a few times, they need to be replaced, or measures need to be taken so that they work for the next hit. As far as other hurricanes, we have seen, and actually some of the projects in the southeast that have been hit by hurricane have actually fared very well from storms if they're built right. That 60 Minutes actually did a feature on a project called Babcock Ranch, which was a local system for a community solar system that didn't lose any solar panels and ran the next day after Hurricane Ian passed by. So that's a great story. Tornado is another exposure, but tornado is very local, as is hail, and it's not something you can easily design for. So when a tornado happens, we saw a few wind turbines in Iowa got damaged from big tornadoes last year. Tornadoes took out a big swath of a solar farm in Florida associated with hurricanes last year. That's something it's a risk that's very difficult to mitigate against, but it's a real risk.
Yeah, it's a real. I've actually witnessed a wind turbine get hit by a tornado and sort of bend the blades, and it's kind of a crazy sight to see, but horrific at the same time. I'm curious about you mentioned the solar panel, and I hadn't really thought of it this way before. But when you're stowing, so if you move this to a 8-degree angle, that all of a sudden makes it more broadside to the wind. Are there typically wind ratings on sort of the manufacturing and implementation of these solar panels to try and withstand a wind to a certain level? Is there a lot of discussion on the hardening of those to be able to handle some of these? We've had multiple derechos here in the past several years where you can't get out of the way of one of those. It's going to happen when it happens, right? I'm curious about kind of the hardening of those systems against broadside wind.
Yeah, great question. And so most of the projects that we see in solar with respect to wind, because I think that's really where you're going at, is on solar.
Yeah.
Batteries have some exposure to natural hazards, but not as much. And the wind projects are more about lightning for the most part.
Mhm.
But and tornadoes. But for solar, there's most trackers that we see on a utility scale the technology is a single axis tracker, or 1P, and that's one design. And I'm talking about track systems, utility scale systems. There are fixed tilt systems like the community solar project I mentioned that don't track at all, and those usually do better in the wind. But there are some systems, when you talk about derecho, that have been damaged when they have 2P configurations, which are really they were able to get more sun, but they're also harder to put into a defense mode against the likes of wind and hail. And the insurance community has seen some losses involving this technology. But to be fair, it's not a technology that's really widely used anymore. It's just an exposure out there. But going back to your question about how are these designed at the high angle to handle wind, they absolutely are. And the technology's changed over the last 5 years, where now most of the tracking companies are able to handle the high winds at a high angle simultaneously, and which is encouraging. But we also have to deal with all of the projects that are out there that didn't have that benefit.
Yeah, I will tell you, it's very fascinating to me, Mike, to see the parallels to even the traditional electric utility industry. And the risks are similar, the impacts are similar, the solves are very different in terms of, right, hailstorms and windstorms and wildfire are very damaging to traditional energy as well. But in the renewable space, it's a very fascinating discussion on how to mitigate these. And I think there's elements of a lot of innovation that can occur over the next 5 to 10 years. And we know that FM is going to be right there looking at the best ways to do it. It's very, very interesting discussion.
Yeah, I'm excited doing it, and we don't do it alone. We work closely with our clients. We work closely with OEMs. I was visiting both Nextracker and Array in the last month for insurer meetings that really are good engagement opportunities. There needs to be more coordination, collaboration. I also went to the Renewable Energy Test Center this week, and that was great. And to hear we need so much more education and learning. I think over time in the insurance world where I work, insuring these projects used to be just about, a lot of times it was just about zip code and aggregation of risk. And we need to differentiate based on the technology used and the ability to withstand extreme weather events better than we are.
Yeah, and getting asset by asset. I mean, that's a really different granularity than sort of farm level or zip code level. But our ability to track that is also getting better by the day as well, in terms of some of the technologies coming in the meteorology world, being able to track these storms more rapidly, updating radar, the ability to use AI to look at sort of short-term forecasts. So we've been focused on kind of the weather risk aspect of this in the short term. My final question for you is related to kind of the climate data. Where is FM utilizing climate data, kind of the, let's call it 5, 10 year or beyond projections in support of how you're supporting the industry?
Yeah, good question. We're a little, not every company has meteorologists as we do that are looking at that problem. But when we work with a client, it's not just about building it for now, it's for building it for the life of the project. And, they can build it however they want, but we're going to give them the advice based on our best understanding. And we're very fortunate at FM that we have teams that are doing research, and we have an approvals group where we actually put an FM stamp on certain equipment. We do that for some solar panels, but we're doing it more in the solar industry over time as well, perhaps with the tracker companies with the systems associated with it. It's when you it's not just about how the hail is going to develop over time, and we have people studying that, but it's also about flooding and the sea levels and how that's going to impact what you do for the areas near the coast. And I'm getting outside of renewables, but sometimes you're putting up mechanisms to protect your site against future storms in advance of the climate developing.
Have you seen it also used in sort of site planning and maybe choosing the site? I know there needs to be studies, of course, on how much solar is available, right? Because these want to be profitable projects, and how much wind is available. But in terms of the risk profile as well, have you seen people adjusting where they're picking sites for future development based on those long-term projections?
Absolutely. We were just talking about that a half hour ago.
Yeah.
We had a client that one of our clients in the solar and wind space has their portfolios evolved over time, where many of them are not even in Middle America at all, and it's because of the hail risk that they chose that. But what's happened overall within the industry is it's been easier to build in Texas, and it's been the land is available and it's economic to build those projects there, except for the fact that they're now in areas sometimes that are challenging from a natural hazards basis, which makes insurance more difficult. There are steps in some cases that clients can take to make the projects more resilient, or to, if it's a flood risk, to prep the site to be able to build it up so it's above the floodplain. That clients are absolutely taking, because they're looking at, and it's not just the insurers that are looking at this, but the financing parties too. In some cases, and I think you touched on this earlier, there's not enough insurance to cover the risk that we expect is going to happen over time. And the modeling associated with it that insurers and financing parties use is not very precise. It's even the most advanced models that are done by the likes of ABS and VDE are much better than what the traditional models insurers use, but it's in some cases has been shown to not be able to project what the actual worst case exposure is. So these are things that we're learning and working on.
Yeah, the actuarial side of things is changing so rapidly as well. And what we see in the weather world, or like in our agriculture world, for example, is it was common to use a 30-year trend for so many different decisions, right? I can assume the last 30 years would kind of tell me what the climate is, but things have changed in that 30-year period, and many are using now maybe a 10-year history to try and get a better picture of sort of what's likely in a location. But then you run into the fact that maybe that 10-year didn't capture the most extreme. And so the modeling that's needed both on the climate side, the weather side, the actuarial side, all these models, it's quite the science to figure out what that real risk profile is, to factor in the changing climate plus what new extremes could occur in the future.
Right. And to be fair, and I want to be, telling you what we're doing, and I think that was one of your questions. We're not really using modeling. We use engineering. So whereas other companies are going to look at, and we will look at what our aggregation is, but what we try to do is specify. And one of the things we didn't talk about, we've been talking about trackers, but we haven't been talking about the thickness of the glass, or the hail resilience of the glass. But over time, we expect that the glass is going to start getting thicker again, because in these projects that testing is showing that those panels are more resilient to extreme weather. We will work with clients to help identify which modules are appropriate for a given area based on the testing we're doing of shooting freezer ice balls at solar panels, and not just us, but other test labs like RETC, like PVEL, like CFE.
Yeah. Reminds me so much of kind of what Texas Tech University has done for tornado damage and, shooting 2x4s at 200 miles per hour and trying to understand sort of the construction practices of even residential homes or commercial offices. Same thing occurring makes a lot of sense to me in the renewable side.
And FM has a test center where we blow things up. We have 2x4s that we shoot against shutters and doors to see how they'll stand up. We do a lot of research in this, and we're hoping that we can help promote the industry towards more resilient technology moving forward.
I'm not going to lie, 12-year-old Renny would love to go in that lab and just watch a bunch of stuff get blown up. It sounds like a lot of fun. Well, Mike, you've been very generous with your time, and I think a lot of people are going to find this a fascinating discussion. We don't, you drive to the common person just driving by a solar farm does not understand the risk that exists at any given time due to weather. And so really appreciate your expertise and insights on not only the industry, but what FM is working on, and a lot of credit to you and your team for helping advance in an innovative way.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me, Renny. I really enjoyed it.
Yes, my pleasure. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you again for DTN.